Did you know you can listen to this show on Audible? Just open up the app, search for EerieCast, and you'll find all my shows. Don't forget to scroll to the bottom of the podcast page and tap Write a Review. I'm trying to get 100 reviews on my show as fast as I can. Thank you. Today's episode features new and creepy urban exploration stories. Urban exploration is defined as exploring man-made structures and facilities, usually abandoned places or ruins. Sometimes places are abandoned for a reason, and you're bound to happen upon something terrifying if you go out urban exploring. Enjoy! Go to darkstories.org to send us your stories to narrate. Check out EerieCast.com to listen to other creepy shows in my network, like Freaky Folklore. Now, let's begin. Last Time Urban Exploring, from Henry J. I used to live in upstate New York. I moved a year ago with my family down south to North Carolina. I still miss the mountains and memories I had while living there from time to time. From midnight hikes to watching the sunset on the train trestle by my house during the summer. Although these memories are great, I'll admit there were some not-so-great memories as well. I definitely liked a good adventure, that's without a doubt, but there was one that was taken a little too far. Back in my junior year of high school, I had slept over the weekend at my friend Mike's house. On Saturday morning, we got up early and went for a hike in his backyard. His backyard pretty much opened into a field, and then a mountain. That's one of the advantages of living in the country. We were planning on meeting some girls at noon, so we had some time to kill before then. As it got closer to noon, we were planning on having a fire that night at one of their houses, so Mike decided to bring a mortar and some fireworks along with us. Probably not the best idea, but whatever. We put them in the back of his trunk and brought some snacks, then got ready to go. Once we made it there, it began to rain. That got us pretty ticked at first, but we checked the weather forecast and it should have been ending by the late afternoon. So that meant we could still possibly have a fire later. In the meantime, we sat in my other friend's basement figuring out what to do while it rained. Mike and I lived about 30 minutes from this girl's house. I wasn't too familiar with the area and neither was Mike. His girlfriend was old school friends with these two girls before she had moved closer to Mike. We came over so I could try getting to know the two of them. One of these girls jokingly brought up an abandoned psych ward that connected to an old special needs school. Just the sound of it gave me goosebumps. But I was up for some urban exploring, and I encouraged everyone else that we should go, because I had never gone. After all, by the sound of it, this probably would have been my first actual real urban exploration. Mike's girlfriend's two friends had been there, but the rest of us had never gone before. Mike thought it was a stupid idea and a waste of time. I was surprised, but I guess he was just nervous. After 15 minutes of debating, we finally decided to give it a go. It was about 10 minutes from the house. We drove into the city part of town. A lot different from where these two girls lived. Mike and I had never been to this area before. The whole town looked pretty dead and dilapidated, to be honest. I started to have second thoughts, but I didn't want to chicken out in front of these two girls. We parked the car in a desolate area on the side of one of the buildings of this abandoned structure. Once there, we realized the psych ward was blocked off, and there was no way we could get in. I'm pretty sure they were trying to restore it, but the school building was a different story. It was a 4-story building that had multiple ways to get in. This place was actually as big as my high school. I got excited chills just thinking about how scary and fun this would be. The doors were locked, but there were plenty of broken windows and loose wooden boards. One thing I wish I knew before we entered the building was the reputation this area of town had for substance addicts and crime. Apparently, the two girls weren't aware of this either. They didn't come to this area of town too often. And apparently, I learned the last time these two girls went to this place, they hadn't even gone inside. They had gotten too scared. They were just trying to look cool in front of me. Anyway, as we each climbed in through one of the windows, we heard our feet echo throughout the whole way. That definitely made the mood a bit more eerie, especially with the rain in the background. I can't lie about how excited I was to explore this place at first. It was definitely the most authentic place an urban explorer could ask for. Graffiti everywhere, desks and furniture still intact, and a bunch of textbooks and school supplies littering the floor. Even though I felt excited, the atmosphere got the best of me and made me feel really paranoid. Every creak of the floor and rustle of the wind through shattered glass windows put me on edge. So you know how I said this was a special needs school? That made the place even more interesting because the psych ward was connected to the school, and that's where the living quarters would have been located, making this school a little more than just a school. There were activity centers spread throughout the school in different rooms, where I guess the kids could have gone to have some fun. It made me feel bad to think that these kids had to live in a psych ward and couldn't enjoy a completely normal life. This thought recurred in my mind for some reason for the entirety of our expedition. Even as I thought about that, though, the activity rooms got more freaky as we continued to explore the first floor. The first place was an auditorium. The sounds of our booming voices echoed in there. It was unbelievable. At one point, we'd all ran and ditched Mike's girlfriend, who came running to the doors of the auditorium where we scared her. Yeah, I know. We weren't really being great people. I can't imagine if it was me who was left in the auditorium. I probably would have soiled myself. After she screamed at us for scaring her, we continued to another room that looked like a movie theater, and that's when things got a little more real. There, we found needles on the ground, and that got me rethinking our trip to this building. I started bringing up low-key comments on how we should leave, but apparently everyone else was unbothered and wanted to keep going. I just tossed it up to some old supplies left by an addict. It's funny how you can go from being the leader and enthusiast of something to being downright horrified and scared out of your wit. I guess that was the day I scared easily. We continued on and found a bowling alley. This made us laugh nervously. There were bowling shoes scattered all over the ground and on top of the lanes. Mike found a bowling ball and had thrown it into one of the lanes to be met by the end of the lane, not making the satisfying sound of bowling pins going down, but instead an ear-piercing clang of the metal behind the lane, barren of any lined-up bowling pins. That put us all on edge, and we kind of just sat there a little nervous. It was odd how we had all just gone suddenly silent after. I guess we were just paranoid about someone else somehow hearing us, even though there was no one else there. After we regained our confidence, we traveled the second and third floors, exploring old classrooms and offices. Even though this place was abandoned and littered, it was interesting how so much of the school-related stuff, right down to paper lists of students' names, were scattered around the building. There were a couple of rooms that were locked. I have no idea why, so we just skipped those. At one point, I thought I heard the distant sound of a door shutting, but no one else heard it, so I brushed it off as my imagination. We had eventually made it to the fourth floor. Just like the other two floors, they were filled with classrooms, offices, and some bathrooms. After we made our rounds on this floor, we decided we were going to head out back home. We had been in there for a while, and we could only take so much dust and mildew. As we made it halfway across one of the hallways that led to a stairway down, we suddenly heard flying footsteps violently pounding the ground below us. That put us all in emergency mode. Mike looked me dead in the eyes with panic in his voice and said, "Dude, where do we go? This place is like a maze. Where do we go?" He was panicking. I had to push him to move and told him to just stay calm. While I whispered to the rest of the girls to follow me, Mike was in the back. Thankfully, we found another staircase going down. As we began to descend, that's when we heard it. The manic scream of a man. Looking back, the guy was probably tripped out on some hardcore stuff and just purely psychotic. Honestly, I have no idea what it could have been. But whatever it was, I certainly didn't want to be around to find out. My adrenaline kicked into overdrive at this point, and I was on the verge of throwing up. We made it to the second floor. We took a pause to listen. We kept going. We passed by a room that had an overwhelmingly strong odor of rot. Don't know what it was. Had no time to figure it out. This place was a maze, and I wasn't about to put my life at risk to see what it could have been. We heard stomping on a floor above us now. Wasn't sure if it was the third or fourth. It was too distant. We kept running until we made it to the first floor. We had no idea which way was out, but we discovered the gymnasium, which was enormous. We ran right through it, Mike taking the lead now and running right into the emergency doors. There was something blocking them on the other side, but whatever it was, we heard a crack as Mike bashed into the door until it opened. As light poured into the empty gymnasium, we had begun to run out. Mike was first. I made sure all the girls had gotten out before I left. As I was about to leave through the door, an old deflated basketball had been tossed from somewhere in the gym. I hadn't seen it, but I heard it from its loud echo. There wasn't enough light to illuminate the gym, but there was enough to see a dark silhouette in one of the corners standing still, looking right in our direction. That nearly made me have a heart attack, and I shrieked, "Run!" to everyone as we exited. There was no way that was the same person we heard screaming upstairs. It would have been impossible for them to catch up to us that fast. Whoever or whatever it was there before we had entered, just sitting there for who the heck knows how long. Because I heard the ball bounce twice before it had stayed put. We were now running across the courtyard, frantically trying to locate my car. Suddenly, we heard an alarm go off. Crap, I thought to myself as we dashed for my car. When we busted out of that exit, some sort of alarm must have been triggered. And to make matters worse, the alarm had some sort of distorted sound to it. If I could compare it to something, it would be a cop car in GTA 5. You know, when you hijack it and it gets all crashed up, so that when you turn the sirens on, they sound all messed up, broken and weird. That's how it sounded, and I can't even tell you the amount of dread that brought to me. Before we turned the corner, I looked back briefly at the exit to the gymnasium. There was someone there. They were wearing a hood though, so I couldn't see their face. What scared me was the fact that they didn't chase us. No, they'd walked to the exit to pull the door closed again, with them still inside. That left me scared. I can't imagine what would have happened if either one of those people had caught us or somehow did something to us. It's unimaginable. None of us ever went back to that place. To be honest, I thought that place would have been maintained with a much higher security level. I guess not. We never heard anything else regarding the abandoned school. We never really talked about it again to each other. It's one of those things you just want to bury and pretend never happened. That's how surreal it was. It was a severely traumatic experience for all of us. The house always draws us back. From Kelsey L3. Whether you actually believe in the paranormal, or you just enjoy listening or reading spooky stories, trying to scare yourself, this is one of the many paranormal experiences I've had, and it was arguably the most terrifying, converting one of the eyewitnesses from a skeptic to completely believing in the paranormal and taking it seriously. My friends and I have always been quite fond of going out, urban exploring. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's when you go out and look for abandoned and derelict buildings to explore and even photograph at times. So no, we didn't go out searching for the haunted side of things. We were just enjoying the eeriness and also the beauty of old abandoned places. Living in Scotland, a lot of these abandoned places are normally surrounded by amazing scenery, from hills and mountains to thick forests and lush fields. So we always made a day out of it whenever we did go exploring. One house in particular was our favorite. So much so, we had already visited a couple of times prior to this experience. Myself and two of my best friends, C and B, decided to go back there, but the condition of the place had declined quite rapidly since the last time we had been, and everything seemed very unstable. But we didn't let that stop us. Finding that our usual entry spot had been boarded up, we felt quite defeated, but we decided to look for another entryway. After searching around for a while, we noticed that the roof on one of the lower parts of the house had been damaged by fire and was practically all gone. It wasn't the easiest to get up to, having to use a tree and each other to do so, but we did finally get in. It was going relatively normal after that. We were wandering around the inside, searching and admiring the rooms we could still get into, being terrified by the occasional bird, or getting spooked by our footsteps and taking photos of the amazing architecture. However, something was different this time. The whole place felt off and a little more eerie than it normally did. I've always been what you would describe as a spiritually inclined person, so I felt this more than what my friends did. One of them was a complete skeptic at the time, so he just brushed it off and said we were over-exaggerating and making things up. However, his mind was about to be completely changed after leaving this house. After exploring the top 3 floors as much as we could, cringing at the spray paint art the vandals had left, we were on the ground floor just having a chat and discussing how much the house's condition had really declined. We were standing in one of the hallways almost in a triangle formation. I was standing in a door frame with my back towards the empty room, with C to my left and B to my right. I still felt uneasy, but I didn't give much thought to it. As we were all conversing about the plans for the rest of the day, I felt something on my back. It felt as if someone had run their hand down my back. From the base of my neck to the center of my back, I felt a firm, consistent pressure until the pressure tapered off down to the base of my back. It was over within seconds. I felt all the color drain from my face as I frantically jumped forward with a scream. B and C both looked at me in confusion and asked what happened and if I had hurt myself. In a haze of confusion and dizziness, I couldn't form any words, never mind describing what I'd just felt. I regained my bearings, and I took a couple of deep breaths before trying my best to explain the sensation of being touched. B's face turned a little pale as she saw how serious I was being. However, C was a skeptic, so he laughed and thought I was joking, or that I had accidentally hit something without realizing. Or maybe it was a bug. I knew that wasn't the case, because for a split second before it happened, I felt every single hair on my body stand up as a warning to what was about to occur. Being slightly freaked out, B and myself managed to convince C that it was time to leave. On top of what had just happened, it was also getting a little cold. While making our way to the same section we had entered through, I started to feel a burning sensation running down my back, like someone had taken hot coals or flame down my spine. Starting to freak out again, I asked B to check if anything was there. But I knew something was wrong with her, because she didn't give me a response. She just fell silent. The next thing I knew, B was calling over C to come and look, which made my anxiety spike up more. From the look on C's face, I became increasingly worried. They both nervously told me that there were marks going down my back. Obviously not being able to see my back myself, I then asked them to take a photo for me to see. Looking at the photo, there were 3 distinctive scratches going down my back, exactly where I'd felt someone or something touch me. At first, C was convinced I'd done it myself, or I'd caught myself on something. But after examining the scratches more, he determined that it couldn't have been. The scratches went under my bra strap, which would have been impossible for me to do without them noticing. By then, we were all trying to keep our calm while internally freaking out. We tried to make our way out as quickly as possible, without injuring ourselves, climbing back over the wall of the house and through the hole where the roof used to be. We collectively walked a few feet away from the house and stopped to look back at it. I was still trying to understand what had just happened. We all agreed that we'd go back to the car and never come back here. The walk back to the car took around 20 minutes, and it was relatively uneventful. Apart from a continuous uneasy feeling that we were being watched or followed, and occasionally thinking we heard footsteps behind us, it was quite peaceful. We tried to focus more on taking in the Scottish countryside. We got to the car where we sat and had a smoke, still trying to completely calm ourselves. It's safe to say that after that day, C took a long time to process the events, but undoubtedly became a believer. We swore to never come back to this house, but for some reason we're always drawn back to it. It's like an urge to come back and visit, like an itch that you can't quite scratch. Maybe we're just drawn in by the eeriness or the mystery around that day, or maybe it's something more than that. My Halloween story, from Fear 23. It was a special Halloween for me, my first year of not trick-or-treating. Instead, I was going to hang out at my friend Thomas's house. I got there at about 7 p.m. I was the last guest to arrive. 3 other kids by the names of Josh, Dylan, and Michael were already there. For 2 hours, we watched old horror movies, ate snacks, and just had a great time. At about 9 p.m., my friends began to invite their girlfriends over. At the time, I was the only one that was single, so I didn't take much joy in watching them be intimate on the couch. I couldn't even watch a scary movie because their girlfriends didn't like scary stuff. At about 9:30, I couldn't take it anymore. My Halloween was being wasted. Halloween meant a lot to me ever since I was little, and I wasn't about to let it get ruined. I thought about a few ways I could get everyone's attention. Then an idea entered my mind. An idea I regret to this day. "Guys," I said, "let's go to the house." My friends all stopped and looked at me confused. Their girlfriends weren't very familiar with Thomas's neighborhood, but my friends were. That was why I chose the subject of the house. You're probably wondering what the house is. The house is an abandoned house on the edge of Thomas's neighborhood. It was one of those houses that no one bought, but nobody bothered to tear it down, so it was just there. Nobody really knows why it was never bought, but some of the seniors living in the neighborhood said that they knew its story. Apparently, the man living inside it killed himself after his wife died of an illness. We've sometimes heard weird noises coming from the house when we walked by, so we tried to avoid it as much as possible. After we explained this to their girlfriends, they suddenly decided that they had to get back home because it was getting late. My plan worked. Little did I know how bad it would backfire. At this point, my friends were onto me, and they wanted to make me pay. I started walking back to the TV room when Josh began talking. "Where you going?" he asked with a grin. "Let's go to the house." I was stuck here. I either had to admit that I wanted to get rid of my friends' girlfriends, or I had to actually go to the house at night. Not wanting to ruin the night even more, I turned around and said, "Let's go." All 3 of them looked at me surprised, but followed me out the front door. Thomas covered it all up by telling his parents that we were going out for late trick-or-treating. Every step there felt horrific. Finally, we made it to the house, and my stomach dropped. It was even scarier at night. I looked down at my watch. 10:05 p.m. "Okay," I said. "We can go back now." No, you wanted us to go in," said Dylan. "Fine," I replied. We proceeded to jump the fence surrounding the property. We walked on the overgrown walkway leading to the house. Open the door," I told Michael. Shaking, he pushed the door slightly. There appeared to be no lock. It just swung open. We entered and honestly became a bit more comfortable. We looked around for a bit, and it kind of just looked like a normal house. This is kind of cool," I said. Suddenly, we heard a loud thud coming from upstairs. Dylan, who was very confident, now decided to go check it out. It didn't take us long to hear the footsteps of our friend above us as he walked around the room. 5 minutes later, we were still hearing footsteps upstairs, but we were beginning to get worried. We debated about going up to check on him when I felt a hand on my shoulder. In a panic, I turned. I looked behind me to see Dylan. I was relieved to see him until we all came to a terrible realization. The footsteps were still going on upstairs. I looked at my horrified friends. We were not alone. Suddenly, we heard the footsteps turn from walking into running in the direction of the stairs. That's when we bolted. We dashed for the door and hopped the fence with ease. We heard a blood-curdling scream behind us, but we kept running. We continued running until we got back to Thomas's house. We locked the door and went into Thomas's room to talk about what we just witnessed. Dylan was the most shaken up. He could not comprehend the fact that he was upstairs with whatever was chasing us. I confessed to my friends that I had other intentions than going to the house, but no one cared anymore. After that, we avoided the house for good. A few years ago, they demolished it, finally, so now at last it's just an empty dirt lot. We still stay clear of it though. Everybody says they want to experience something scary or exhilarating, but trust me, don't do anything that could get you hurt or even killed, no matter how cool it seems or how pressured you feel to do it. Seeing the Figures, from KrimsonKrynesh. I visited a TNT factory that was later turned into a farm, so the land area is huge, after several buildings and plots of land were sold off in Pennsylvania. The farm did not work out in the long run. They packed up upon deciding to leave quickly. Some of these buildings were homes to workers and owners' families. These buildings included a main factory, a church, silos, water towers, wells, and so forth. All of it sitting now in age and water-filled decay, with nature slowly reclaiming it all in its green glory, despite the various deaths. Said road in which the factory is on is no longer named. However, it is easy to find, as it's not far from a glass factory, which makes it hard to really catch any voices, only rather loud noises near you. The TNT factory draws various groups of people in. I had spent many days and nights exploring the area, and because of the swampy area, we were generally looking down wearing regular shoes in a mess as we were always on a last-minute plan. This time was different. We had flashlights, even waterproof, muck boots, jackets if it got cold or rained, drinks and snacks and phones. We explored those buildings. We found a water-filled area, and without the equipment for it, aside from putting a flashlight on a string, we couldn't go in. But we all felt something off about it. The church was burnt down, as well as another large building that was sold to a college. Most of the buildings were bad, but these were the worst. There was a building here in which years ago a young man fell from it. We very carefully explored it. Things were seemingly constantly falling from the upper areas of the building around us. It had tunnels underneath that were utterly flooded. We had put some flashlights as far down as we could, close to the ladder that we found. In total, there were 5 of us there, and we all stayed close together, unless we were climbing something. But even then I had to stay within view, as I have a terrible tendency to wander off. We had B and his pregnant girlfriend T, me, and I was there with the man I was seeing at the time, AA. Then there was the odd guy out, but he wasn't important as he somehow saw nothing this whole time. It's important to know that the girl knew the man who perished, the one who'd fallen from the building. She had told us the story, and I, being quite nosy, had looked it up to confirm it. We were actually on our way out of the area with it being about 3 in the morning, with ironically a full moon above us. We had explored most of the area and were feeling odd most of the night, like we were being watched or followed, even to the point of hearing things in the overgrowth or wooden areas beside us. At one point I'd heard someone near us in a terribly run-down building walking around. As we continued, we decided to hit this small, almost home-like building, but it turned out not to be a housing unit at all, more a place for melting things down. It was a bit boarded up, but the upper windows were left alone and smashed to all heck. We were looking around when the girl happened to look up. She ended up having one mean fright. She hollered for us to look up. We did, and standing in the window was a black figure. Based on the build and height, I think it was a man. Being reckless, I moved closer to look, but then the man moved back, but the flashlight had caught him. I swear he was solid black. But the more scared people in the group ushered us out to leave, in fear of it coming to us. Leaving involved going around the building where the young man had perished, which we had split up for, and we all sort of kept our eyes low, except for A and T. Seemingly at the same time in different groups, they each made a noise. This caused us to look up, and we saw a figure falling from the top, almost as if it had jumped. That finally did it. We pretty much were gone in a matter of minutes then. The journey from the car that took about 10 minutes only seemingly took seconds on the way back. I remember looking back as we left, and took notice of an odd figure. It seemed like a warning. A tall figure without noticeable features, but the stance screamed, "This is my territory." As I finish this, I think it's time to return there for another visit.